Are you convinced that you need every tiny detail mapped out before you actually start writing your novel? Here's the hard truth. Over-planning might be what's actually stifling that very creativity that you need to bring your story to life. Now, if you're feeling stuck or uninspired by all of the prep work that you have been doing, stick around, because in this video, I'm going to be diving into why over-outlining your project might be the reason that your story feels lifeless, and what we can do instead. Welcome back to The Flattery, where we rewrite the rules of writing together. And remember, you write the story, you set the pace. Okay, so I know that there has been this talk online and this trend that I have been seeing a lot popping up over the last year or so, with a lot of writing gurus kind of coming onto Instagram in particular and shouting about how you must follow a rigid outline, and how if you are not outlining your story or you're not structuring your story over a certain 3-act or 5-act story structure, your book is basically just going to suck. I'm just trying to kind of hop on and say something about it, basically, because it is annoying me to my core to be seeing such definitive advice like that online, and I know what it does to the minds of younger writers sometimes, because they will see that and they will feel self-conscious and think that the way that they're writing is wrong. Now, I want to say one thing. There is no wrong way to write. The first thing that I want to talk about today is the fact that there is this potential trap that you can get stuck into if you follow rigid outlines for your project. And that's this blueprint mentality. All right. So like, you'll see people talking about romance having to have a certain kind of structure, the 3rd act breakup, or the mentor dying in fantasy, that sort of thing. You'll have tropes and you'll know exactly at what point in the book they're supposed to happen. What happens when we follow this advice to a T is we're going to end up with just a bunch of books that are all the same. That's it. And there's going to slowly be less and less originality present in those books that we read and in our writing and in our thinking. So this idea of rigid structures ultimately is something that can really stifle creativity and originality and uniqueness, and it can really take away that spark that your project might have had if you were a little bit more open to spontaneity, if you were a little bit more open to discovering what you are writing about. And when you're not, this is something that can really just be lost with an overly detailed outline. And it's a shame, because in my experience with the projects that I've written and with the clients that I've worked with, the moment that they had a different idea that completely broke the outline, we realized that that was the right thing for the story. That was the right direction to take the story in. And that wouldn't have happened if they were too stuck in their outline or if they weren't open to changing it. Again, I probably have said this already, but I have experienced this so many times where I was working with a writer and they would get an idea and they would ask me without fail, is it okay if I change that? Like, I have something completely different in my outline, but I'm feeling like this might be interesting, but then I don't know if I'm self-sabotaging by trying to change the story or if I should just stick rigidly to the outline. And I always tell them, follow the new idea, follow the thread, see where it takes you, because usually, most times, not every time, but most times you will feel it in your gut when you get a new idea that this is the thing that your book should be about. This is the thing that you should explore. You should discover it. You should be open to changing your outline if this betters your project. Now, there is a common misconception or a myth that detailed outlines guarantee your story is going to be more successful. This kind of comes from certain types of ads and promotions that writing gurus put out online saying, you know, I used this romance beat sheet and I sold 200,000 copies of my book or whatever. That kind of makes you think that you need this beat sheet. Obviously, it's a marketing trick, but do you actually need to follow this story structure in order to have a best-selling good book? I don't know. And I know that this is maybe a field that's open to interpretation and discussion. And so if you have an opinion on that, I would love for you to weigh in. Tell me in the comments below, do you think that your book stands a greater chance of success if you are following conventional story structures and tropes? Or do you think that your book might perform better if you add a spin of originality and your own spark into the mix? Personally, I think that a story's authenticity and spark and magic and energy can really just fade completely if you are forcing yourself to follow preset plot points or story structures, or, just make it to that next story beat. I think this is a thing that a lot of writers would benefit from understanding, is when you are writing, your subconscious is doing so much work for you. You're not even aware of all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes and all the ideas that are flowing in there and all the dots that are connecting. And sometimes when you are writing any random scene and you come up with a seemingly random detail, I'm sure this has happened to you if you are a writer and if you have written a novel from start to at least midway, you will have come upon this moment where you write something and you add a little detail in there. You add a piece of clothing, or a scene setting, or a seemingly unimportant minor character or something. And you come to sort of midway, halfway, maybe the end of your book, and you realize why you added that, because it will connect to something bigger and it will make a lot more sense. And basically what I'm trying to say here is that's your subconscious. You listen to your subconscious in order to put that detail in and then to later connect it to something bigger, something that makes more sense, and something that ties your story together. That's your subconscious at work. It's the same thing as when your characters take their own life on, basically. They're going to start making their own choices, and you're going to be like, wait, do I need to maybe rein them back in and let them stick to the outline that I have prepared for them? Or should I let them kind of go unhinged? Should I experiment with this? Should I try and push them to their boundaries and see what it is that they want? Because you will come to a point to your story where your characters are just plain going to disagree with what you have written in your outline. And you should let them. When you do this, and when you are open to change, what you're actually doing is you're letting your story evolve organically. You're almost researching it like a thesis. And this is why I love that comparison, that your novel's thematic argument is basically the same thing as a thesis question. And what you're doing when you're writing is you're actually researching in order to answer that thematic question or thematic argument that you are trying to research. So when you allow yourself to actually think through that thematic question and the point of your story, and when you allow yourself to sort of authentically explore what your characters might be doing in a certain situation, or where they might be going, or how they might be behaving, or whether a certain plot point fits better or not, what you're doing essentially is you are creating a much stronger and a much more realistic story in the end. Because you're not just following a predetermined plot, you're not just following predetermined plot points, and your story is going to be less predictable that way as well. Now, of course, planning is not always bad. I am not against planning in any way. I'm not saying you should pants your way through your entire book because that's the most genius writing that you could ever do. No, you should do planning, but you should only do the amount of planning that works for you. And you should also always throughout the entire process of writing and revising, be open to change. Be open to adapt to something that might feel a little bit better for your characters and might feel a little bit better for your story, even if it doesn't necessarily follow the right tropes for your genre or hit the exact plot beat at the exact time that it's meant to hit it. If you are struggling to start writing and you don't know when you've had enough planning done, I would personally, and this is just my approach, there are other approaches out there, and I actually recently did a podcast on this with another YouTuber, Carson Long. We talked about this idea of having a proto draft, a first sort of discovery draft. So you can listen to that here. Maybe. If there is not a link coming up right here, or right here, again, I think it's right here. If there's not a link coming up, then it'll probably be in the description box. I'm so sorry. But yeah, where was I going with this? But if you are going to plan out one thing and you're not exactly sure where to stop with planning it out, I would strongly recommend starting with your thematic argument and the core question of your story. This is probably the hardest thing to figure out, by the way, as a writer, but I swear by it. If you at least try and find a direction of the thematic question of your story, like what is it? Why am I writing this? What are my characters going to learn? What is my audience going to take away from this? If you know that, then planning out everything else around that becomes a lot easier. And if you need one thing to start writing and to feel confident in writing, I would say that would be your character's motivations and your character's internal conflict and their backstory. That's the kind of thing that I do think you should have at least a little bit figured out before you head into actually writing your draft. But again, be very open to all of those things changing and adapting as you learn more about your world, your plot, your characters, and all of these other elements and how they come together. And I actually want to share a little bit about how I experienced this sort of thing, where I was writing Statue of a Woman, and I actually didn't fully grasp my thematic argument until the second to last chapter of the entire novel, right? So the entire first draft, I had to get to chapter 19 to have my characters have this conversation, to hear what they are actually saying, to actually having the dialogue write out my thematic argument at the very end. And I was shocked by it. And I was like, this makes so much sense. My subconscious did so much work for me here. And I know finally what this book is about. But that is not something that I would have known if I hadn't just simply let my characters be in some moments and let them discover what it is that they needed to discover on their own. I would not have adapted my characters, because I went into the first draft of Statue of a Woman thinking that Liv, my protagonist, was going to be just like this cutesy little shy 13-year-old girl who's kind of struggling with losing the death of her mother and with letting go and that sort of thing. Fast forward a couple of drafts later, and a couple of revisions, she is the meanest and most selfish little girl that I could have come up with. But that is what she needed to be for this story to make sense and for my thematic argument to hold up water and for her to actually be interesting and not predictable, right? Not all 13-year-old girls are cute and shy and struggling with things and, you know, that sort of classic, typical character her age. I put a different spin on her, and it really fit into the story's core arguments and into the genre, even because it was Gothic historical. And yeah, it just made everything click together a little bit better. And it only happened because I got to a certain scene about a quarter of the way through my story, and Liv basically told me, I don't like this character that you are trying to make me like. Actually, I think I hate him. And so I entertained the possibility of her hating him, and that ended up becoming sort of the basis of the entire plot, basically. Her hating this other character whom I originally tried to get her to get along with. So take from that what you will. I'm hoping that, you know, you're ready to simplify and get rid of rigid outlining. And if you are, you can check out my video tutorial on the easy character template. It's full of key questions that you will need in order to develop a really strong character, just enough to know your story's foundation without actually, you know, stifling your creativity and shooting yourself in the knee before you've even started to write. So yeah, you can head over to that video next, and I will see you in the next one.